Picture this. One of Hollywood's biggest superstars walks onto a late-night talk show stage, but instead of the usual laughs and promotion, what unfolds is a shocking expose that destroys careers and reveals the ugly truth about backstage betrayal. What you're about to discover will completely change how you view celebrity interviews forever. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is about to blow your mind, and I guarantee you've never heard anything like this before. Tonight, I'm bringing you the inside story of how one conversation on live television became the most explosive moment in entertainment history. We're talking about a confrontation so intense, so raw, and so unexpected that it left viewers speechless and industry insiders scrambling to cover their tracks. This isn't just another celebrity drama. This is the moment when years of hidden sabotage came crashing into the spotlight, ending careers and exposing the dark side of Hollywood that most people never get to see. What happens when someone you trust has been secretly working against you for years? What happens when that betrayal gets exposed in front of millions of people? The answers to these questions will shock you, entertain you, and give you a front row seat to one of the most dramatic confrontations ever captured on camera. The atmosphere backstage was thick with tension that particular evening. Dwayne Johnson, known worldwide as The Rock, sat alone in the guest preparation area, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by something much more serious. Those who knew him well would have recognized the signs immediately. The clenched jaw, the focused stare, the way he held his phone like it contained evidence of a crime. Because in many ways it did. The makeup team had finished their work, but instead of the pre-show energy that usually filled these moments, there was an uncomfortable silence. Production assistants moved around nervously, sensing that something was different about this particular guest appearance. They had seen thousands of celebrities come through these doors, but none had ever radiated the kind of controlled intensity that was filling the room now. On the small screen of his device, Dwayne stared at a series of messages that had arrived just before his scheduled appearance. These weren't ordinary texts. They were revelations that would change everything. Messages from studio executives, producers, and industry insiders who had finally decided to tell him the truth about what had been happening behind closed doors. The truth about who had been sabotaging his career. A young production assistant approached carefully, clearly nervous about interrupting whatever internal storm was building. "We need you ready in 5 minutes," she managed to say, her voice betraying her unease. She had been working on television sets for years, but something about this moment felt different, dangerous even. Dwayne looked up slowly, and when he spoke, his voice carried a calm that somehow felt more threatening than any shout could have been. He needed to speak with the host privately before they went live. The assistant tried to explain about timing and schedules, but The Rock's response made it clear that normal procedures weren't going to apply tonight. Meanwhile, on the main stage, Jimmy Kimmel was delivering his opening monologue to an unsuspecting audience. The crowd laughed at his jokes about Hollywood culture and celebrity antics, completely unaware that they were about to witness something far more dramatic than any scripted comedy bit. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew what was coming. Here was a host making fun of Hollywood excess while being completely blind to the reckoning heading his way. Jimmy announced his guest with the usual late-night enthusiasm, mentioning that he had some particularly interesting questions prepared. To the audience, this sounded like typical host banter. To Dwayne, watching from backstage, those words sounded like a challenge. The production team was frantically trying to arrange the private conversation Dwayne had requested, but time was running out and the show was already live. The familiar entrance music began, and Dwayne found himself with no choice but to walk onto that stage, carrying knowledge that would either expose the truth or destroy his own reputation in the process. As he stepped through the curtain, the audience erupted in their usual enthusiastic welcome, but their cheers seemed distant and muffled compared to the sound of his own heartbeat. Jimmy rose from behind his desk with arms outstretched in the practiced gesture that had welcomed countless guests over the years. But as Dwayne approached, something in the host's expression shifted. Years of reading audiences and managing unexpected moments had given Jimmy excellent instincts, and those instincts were now screaming that this wasn't going to be a normal interview. The handshake that followed would be analyzed and discussed for years afterward. What should have been a brief, professional greeting became something much more significant. Dwayne took Jimmy's offered hand, but instead of the quick shake the audience expected, he held on. The grip tightened just enough to make Jimmy's eyes widen with surprise and concern. "We need to have a conversation," Dwayne said, his voice low, but perfectly clear thanks to the sensitive microphones picking up every word. The audience in the front rows strained to hear, sensing that something unusual was happening, but not yet understanding the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Jimmy tried to maintain his composure, falling back on his professional training and years of experience handling unexpected moments. "Well, that's exactly why we're here," he replied, attempting to steer things back toward normal interview territory. But as they moved toward their seats, even the most casual observer could see that this wasn't going to be typical late-night banter. The seating arrangement itself became significant. Jimmy positioned himself differently than usual, creating slightly more distance and angling his body in what body language experts would later identify as a defensive posture. Most viewers wouldn't notice such subtle details, but Dwayne had spent enough time reading people to recognize when someone was preparing for conflict. What happened next would become one of the most analyzed moments in television history. Instead of discussing upcoming projects or sharing amusing anecdotes, Dwayne cut straight to the heart of why he was really there. He wanted to talk about the conversations Jimmy had been having behind closed doors, conversations about him, conversations designed to damage his career and reputation. The audience felt the shift immediately. This wasn't the playful celebrity banter they had come to expect from late-night television. This was something real, something serious, something that made everyone in the studio sit up and pay attention. Jimmy's laugh in response sounded forced and hollow, a clear sign to anyone listening carefully that he was already on the defensive. When Dwayne mentioned specific conversations about ensuring certain opportunities didn't come his way, Jimmy's face went through a series of micro-expressions that revealed far more than his words ever could. The confusion, the concern, and finally the calculated innocence that settled on his features told a story of someone who had been caught completely off guard. The phone came out next, and with it, the evidence that would change everything. Text messages from industry executives, documented conversations, proof of a systematic campaign designed to undermine one of Hollywood's biggest stars. The camera operators, sensing that something unprecedented was happening, began adjusting their shots to capture every moment of what was clearly becoming television history. Jimmy's attempt to dismiss everything as a misunderstanding fell flat immediately. Years of success had taught Dwayne to recognize the difference between genuine confusion and deliberate deception, and what he was seeing from the host was clearly the latter. The audience, too, was beginning to understand that they weren't watching a scripted segment or a publicity stunt. This was real conflict playing out in real time. The first piece of evidence was devastating. A text message from Marcus Chun at Universal Studios, an executive producer who had been considering Dwayne for a major action franchise. The message revealed that Jimmy had contacted him directly, expressing concerns about Dwayne's alleged attitude problems and questioning whether he would be a good fit for their project. The studio fell into complete silence as Dwayne read the message aloud. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath, understanding that they were capturing something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Jimmy's face went pale, and for the first time since the interview began, he seemed to realize just how much trouble he was in. But that was only the beginning. The second message came from Sarah Williams at Disney, revealing another conversation where Jimmy had questioned Dwayne's suitability for a superhero film. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't a single incident or a casual conversation. This was a systematic campaign of professional sabotage. Jimmy's attempts at defense became increasingly desperate. He tried to frame his actions as honest industry discussions, claiming that people regularly asked for his opinions about actors. But Dwayne's response cut through these justifications like a knife. When had a talk show host become a casting director? When had someone whose job was entertainment become someone who decided who got what roles in Hollywood? The audience was completely captivated now, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Several people in the front rows had pulled out their phones to record, despite the show's usual policies against filming. They recognized that this was history in the making, a moment that would be talked about and analyzed for decades. The revelation about Netflix changed everything. Tom Bradley, head of original content, had been considering Dwayne for a lead role in a major action series worth $50 million over 3 seasons. But Jimmy had reached out with specific concerns about Dwayne's professionalism, claiming to have heard from multiple sources about attitude problems and ego issues. Jimmy's reaction to this revelation was immediate and telling. His face went from pale to almost gray, and he gripped his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His claim not to know who Tom Bradley was rang hollow in a room full of people who understood exactly how the entertainment industry worked. The details that followed painted a picture of deliberate, systematic sabotage. Phone calls to studio executives carefully planted seeds of doubt, specific warnings about working with one of Hollywood's most reliable and professional actors. This wasn't casual conversation or honest opinion sharing. This was character assassination disguised as industry networking. Dwayne stood up, his full height making him tower over the seated host, and asked the question that would define the entire confrontation. In all of these conversations Jimmy had been having about him, had he ever mentioned anything positive? Had he ever discussed Dwayne's work ethic, his professionalism, his track record of successful films? Or had every single conversation focused exclusively on alleged problems and manufactured concerns? The silence that followed this question was deafening. Jimmy's inability to answer spoke louder than any words could have. Here was the truth laid bare. Every conversation, every phone call, every interaction had been designed to damage and undermine, not to provide balanced or honest assessment. Jimmy's final admission was perhaps the most damaging of all. He had expressed concerns about Dwayne to people in the industry, not because of any legitimate professional issues, but because he believed that success was going to Dwayne's head. The jealousy that had been lurking beneath the surface finally emerged, raw and undeniable. But Dwayne's response to this accusation revealed the true character difference between the two men. He detailed his actual professional behavior, arriving early, staying late, treating everyone on set with respect regardless of their position. He had built his success through dedication and hard work, not by trying to tear down others. The comparison was stark and obvious to everyone watching. On one side was someone who had achieved success through talent, hard work, and professionalism. On the other was someone who had responded to that success with jealousy and sabotage. The audience didn't need anyone to explain which approach was worthy of respect. Jimmy's attempts to end the interview and cut to commercial were firmly shut down. Dwayne made it clear that since Jimmy had chosen to conduct his campaign of sabotage in private conversations, their confrontation was going to happen in public, in front of everyone. The poetic justice of this reversal wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. The desperation in Jimmy's voice, when he begged to handle things privately, revealed just how completely he understood what was happening to his career and reputation. Everything he had built was crumbling in real time, broadcast live to millions of viewers who would never see him the same way again. Dwayne's final statements before leaving the stage were devastating in their simplicity and truth. He had respected Jimmy, had considered him one of the good guys in an industry known for its challenges and betrayals. The disappointment in his voice was perhaps more damaging than any anger could have been. The security guards who finally appeared seemed confused about what they were supposed to do. After all, no physical threats had been made. No violence had occurred. This was simply truth being exposed, lies being revealed, and consequences finally catching up with actions that had been hidden for too long. Jimmy's final desperate plea as Dwayne walked away, suggesting they could work something out, revealed a complete failure to understand what had just happened. There was no working out character assassination. There was no compromising on deliberate career sabotage. Some betrayals are simply too complete to be forgiven or forgotten. Dwayne's parting words were final and absolute. He would make sure that everyone in Hollywood knew exactly what Jimmy had been doing. Every studio executive, every producer, every agent would hear about this conversation and understand that Jimmy Kimmel could not be trusted. The network of professional relationships that had enabled his sabotage would become the means of his professional destruction. The audience sat in stunned silence as Dwayne Johnson walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage for what everyone understood would be the final time. They had witnessed something that would change late-night television forever, a moment when the carefully maintained facade of Hollywood friendliness was stripped away to reveal the ugly reality of professional jealousy and betrayal. Jimmy remained in his chair, staring at the empty space where his career had just ended, understanding that nothing would ever be the same again. The comfortable world of scripted interactions and managed publicity had been shattered by a few minutes of devastating truth. What made this confrontation so powerful wasn't just the exposure of Jimmy's sabotage, but the stark contrast it revealed between two completely different approaches to success and professional relationships. On one side was someone who had built his career by lifting others up, maintaining professionalism, and earning respect through hard work. On the other was someone who had chosen to tear others down in a misguided attempt to elevate himself. The aftermath would be swift and brutal. Within hours, clips of the confrontation were circulating across social media platforms, generating millions of views and thousands of comments. Industry insiders who had been quietly aware of Jimmy's behavior began speaking out, confirming details and adding their own experiences to the growing narrative. Studio executives who had received Jimmy's calls began to publicly distance themselves from his opinions and recommendations. The very network of relationships he had used to spread his poison became the means of his professional isolation. Agents stopped returning his calls, publicists avoided his requests for guests, and advertising partners began to reconsider their associations. The impact on Jimmy's show was immediate and devastating. Ratings plummeted as viewers struggled to reconcile the person they had welcomed into their living rooms with the jealous saboteur who had been exposed on that stage. Sponsors began pulling their support, unwilling to be associated with someone whose character had been so thoroughly revealed. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the industry itself. The confrontation forced a long-overdue conversation about professional ethics, about the responsibility that comes with influence and platform, and about the difference between honest industry networking and deliberate character assassination. For Dwayne Johnson, the confrontation marked a turning point not just in his relationship with Jimmy Kimmel, but in his understanding of how the entertainment industry really worked. The revelation that someone he had considered a friend and ally had been actively working against him was painful, but it also provided clarity about who could and couldn't be trusted. The phone calls he had referenced during the confrontation were just the tip of the iceberg. In the days that followed, more executives came forward with their own stories of Jimmy's attempts to influence their decisions about Dwayne. The pattern that emerged was even more systematic and deliberate than anyone had initially realized. What struck many observers was the calculated nature of Jimmy's campaign. These weren't casual comments or offhand remarks. They were carefully targeted interventions designed to have maximum impact on specific opportunities. The timing of his calls, the executives he chose to contact, and the concerns he chose to raise all showed a level of planning that made his actions even more disturbing. The psychological impact of discovering such betrayal cannot be understated. For someone like Dwayne, who had built his reputation on loyalty, hard work, and treating others with respect, learning that a supposed friend had been systematically undermining him was devastating. The fact that he handled this revelation with such composure and dignity only highlighted the contrast between his character and Jimmy's. Industry analysts began to examine the broader implications of what had been revealed. How many other careers had been damaged by similar behind-the-scenes sabotage? How many opportunities had been lost because of jealous colleagues spreading unfounded concerns? The Kimmel-Johnson confrontation became a catalyst for examining these darker aspects of Hollywood networking. The role of jealousy in professional relationships became a major topic of discussion. Jimmy's own admission that he believed success was going to Dwayne's head revealed the poisonous thinking that had driven his actions. Instead of celebrating a colleague's achievements or learning from them, he had chosen to tear them down out of envy and resentment. The contrast between the two men's approaches to success was stark and instructive. Dwayne had built his career by consistently delivering quality work, treating everyone with respect, and maintaining professionalism even in difficult situations. Jimmy had chosen to try to limit others' success rather than focusing on improving his own performance. The audience reaction to the confrontation was overwhelmingly supportive of Dwayne and critical of Jimmy. Comment sections across social media platforms were filled with expressions of disgust at Jimmy's behavior and admiration for how Dwayne had handled the situation. The public's moral compass was clear. They could distinguish between justified anger and petty jealousy. For late-night television as a whole, the confrontation raised questions about the power and influence that hosts wield behind the scenes. If Jimmy Kimmel could make calls that affected major casting decisions, what did that say about the blurred lines between entertainment and industry influence? The incident sparked discussions about ethics and accountability that continue to this day. The legal implications were also significant. While no formal charges were filed, entertainment lawyers began discussing whether Jimmy's actions could constitute interference with business relationships or defamation. The documented nature of his campaign, revealed through the text messages Dwayne had received, provided clear evidence of deliberate harm to professional reputation. Perhaps most importantly, the confrontation served as a masterclass in how to handle betrayal with dignity and strength. Instead of responding with personal attacks or emotional outbursts, Dwayne presented facts, asked direct questions, and let Jimmy's own words and actions speak for themselves. It was a powerful demonstration of how truth can be more devastating than any insult. The broader entertainment industry began to implement changes in response to the scandal. Some agencies and studios developed new protocols for evaluating unsolicited opinions about talent, recognizing that such input might be motivated by personal rather than professional concerns. The incident became a case study in business schools and entertainment programs about professional ethics and integrity. For viewers and fans, the confrontation provided a rare glimpse behind the curtain of Hollywood relationships. The carefully maintained public personas that celebrities present were stripped away to reveal the real human dynamics of jealousy, betrayal, and courage. It was a reminder that the entertainment industry, for all its glamour, is still populated by people with the same flaws and virtues as everyone else. The story continues to resonate because it speaks to universal human experiences. Most people have encountered jealous colleagues or friends who have undermined them behind the scenes.